Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Crisis talks at Red Bull as they try and figure out how to keep Max Verstappen at their team. Big rumours have emerged today that if Max goes into this year's summer break lower than P3 in the World Drivers' Championship, he is able to completely walk away from that contract to Red Bull and go to another team. That, according to Helmut Marko, is a very realistic possibility as it stands, but it comes on the same day the rumours are emerging George Russell is about to get a new Mercedes contract. If these things come true, the cat is most certainly among the pigeons for next year, 2026. The driver market was crazy last year. If Max were to go from Red Bull, that would really open up a whole new world of possibilities. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Thanks for all the new support, by the way. Over the last few days, it is the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix this weekend. Couple of quick updates from yesterday. Russell did not get penalised in the ends for accidentally opening the DRS. He gained 0.02 seconds by opening it, and he gave up basically 3/10 of the next corner in order to compensate. Look, we give the stewards a hard time, and I think for very good reason. Sainz actually yesterday after the race, if you guys follow me on TikTok, you'll have seen it. Sainz got a 3-place penalty after the race because he didn't serve his 10-second penalty that he got towards the end of the Grand Prix. He actually did serve the 10-second penalty. The stewards missed it and gave him a 3-place penalty for the next Grand Prix in Saudi. They then said, oh yeah, our bad. Like, you know, yeah, unlucky Carlos. That was, we're just testing, making sure you guys are on the ball. So look, we give the stewards a hard time, and as I say, largely there is reasons behind it. But on this one, I think they probably have made the right call. There was also another clip of, I think it was even Charles Leclerc, his DRS opening for like, you know, a quarter of a second or something by accident as well, in that whole debacle with Russell's transponder. So it turned out that they just said, all right, whatever, you got away with it. And it's pretty big for the championship, certainly for Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, that Norris ends up in P3. At the end of the day, Lando, for all the criticism that's understandably coming his way, he's still leading the championship. And he's the only driver to be on, what is it, the podium every single Grand Prix so far. So, you know, he's done an okay job, and I do think that he can get better. I mean, we saw Piastri have a slump last season when there was a few races where he just wasn't really on the pace. I think Lando can get out of it, and it's not like he needs to do it right now because it's a long championship, but certainly for Lando's confidence, he'll want to come back very strongly at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix in just a few days' time. Hülkenberg was disqualified for plank wear. Now, this is an issue which will continue to recur. We actually heard Fred Vasseur say this after they got disqualified in China. He basically said, look, there will be more disqualifications. Teams will push the boundaries to try and gain performance. And Hülkenberg's car, it was down to 8.4, 8.5, pretty much the same as what Hamilton's was when he got disqualified, below the 9mm thickness allowed. So very interesting. I know there's talk about how, because, you know, McLaren run their car low, they seem to be okay on the plank wear side, but who knows? Maybe there is more to come. A couple of other quotes coming out of the weekend, and this is certainly relevant for today as well. So after the qualifying session, Max was asked, like, look, are you in the championship fight? I mean, obviously he is, but he says, look, McLaren right now are not my competitors. I am only a participant in this championship. I am not in the title battle right now. And Piastri gave, I thought, a very interesting assessment. This got 60,000 likes on Twitter here, this post, mainly because of the implications for Lando. Because we know that Lando is, let's say he's played down, he's got this whole underdog gimmick going on right now. And I think to be to the credit of Piastri, he owns it. He says, I'm not shying away from the fact that we've got the best car at the moment. To say otherwise is not correct. Clearly they do. It's about capitalizing on it. And look, Lando continues to realize how even if you've got the best car, it's not exactly a guarantee that you're going to be able to win championships, even when Lando was considered to be a big favorite coming into this season. Let's talk Red Bull though, and what is going on in that camp right now, because yesterday, by some metrics, was actually their most successful Grand Prix in a while. For the first time since Vegas 2024, they actually scored points with both drivers. I mean, it was a Perez DNF, a Perez DNF, a Lawson DNF, a Lawson outside of the points, and then, of course, a Yuki Tsunoda P12 in Japan. But he got a couple of points on the board, and that was actually very commendable. I think the one thing for Yuki that I was impressed by is that he was going for moves. I mean, he sent a couple of dive bombs down into turn 1, and that's not something that a driver with no confidence would do. If you've got no confidence in the car, you're not going to send a big dive bomb because you feel like, it's probably going to go horribly wrong. But Tsunoda did it. He got away with it. He made a couple of moves. It wasn't a spectacular race by any means, but it was still double points. So on some level, great. What a weekend for Red Bull, right? Both drivers in the points. And if they've got their second driver in the points, surely that means Max is on the podium fighting for the win. But no, he spent some time in the Grand Prix down in P20 and had a disastrous race pretty much on all sides. Somehow salvaged to P6, but it looked like for a long time that it was going to be substantially worse. And Red Bull clearly realised that if this continues for too much longer, not only are they not going to win either championship, but Max may just say, you know what, guys, it's been a pleasure. I'll see you, maybe never again. I'll go to a different team. So yesterday, there was what was considered a crisis meeting, an intensive meeting, a real emergency affair with Horner, with Washe and Monaghan, some of the technical guys, and then Helmut Marko involved as well. This I thought was fascinating. I mean, I'd love to be a fly on the wall, for these type of situations, but Ted Kravitz, doing his notebook yesterday, said that Raymond Vermeulen, who's Max's manager, came into the Red Bull garage and gave Helmut Marko what can only be described as a piece of his mind. He was remonstrating with Marko, who was just standing there taking it, and then Raven stormed off to the back of the garage, taking off his pass as he went. Clearly, they are not happy. Now, I wonder exactly what this was over, because of all the people to have a go at, obviously you can understand Vermeulen and Max's frustration, but it's not, what's Marko going to do, Maybe he'll just take the beating, whereas Christian Horner might not be so happy to. Certainly not, it's not public, right? But you know what I'm saying, in that kind of a setting. But, the idea of taking his pass off, having a bit of a moment here. And, look, it was a disastrous Grand Prix for Red Bull on so many ways. The traffic light, which goes green to let the drivers go, that was a problem. They obviously had brake issues for both of their drivers too, that they think they can resolve, I think. But the main issue was just pure performance, right? The car just wasn't very good. I think it's a circuit that exacerbates some of the weaknesses of that car. I don't think they're expecting to be that competitive this weekend, but I was thinking, okay, maybe Max can salvage a third, and that would still keep the dreams alive on some level, especially after a masterclass in Suzuka. But as Marko says, with performance like this, the World Championship is not going to be happening. Max had to overtake Gasly on the final lap of the race, and he was beefing with midfield cars for the vast majority of the race. And frankly, the Red Bull around Bahrain looked like a piece of midfield machinery. And that's the frustrating thing as well for Max, is that it's not just that the car wasn't great, but everything else was perfect. The strategy was questionable, let's be real. I mean, going onto the hard tyres, maybe they had no other option but to try it, but he wasn't a happy man on the hards. The pit stops were frankly disastrous, both of them, and he had issues all over the shop during the Grand Prix. And if Max was only able to salvage P6 out of that, it shows that the car just isn't anywhere near where they need it to be. And this is probably the key issue. I mean, I remember Abu Dhabi last year, we were talking about this, probably Abu Dhabi the year before, we were talking about this to some degree, and that is Red Bull's correlation issues. What they see in the wind tunnel, what they see on track are different. And John Noble mentioned in a video that they did with the race last night that the main correlation issue they suffer with is that Red Bull's wind tunnel in Milton Keynes is temperature sensitive. So every time they do a run, they get a slightly different reading, and they have to try and make their own calculations and adjustments from that. Not ideal. And they're turning up to the Grand Prix track and still their car is not matching what it's doing in the simulator. This maybe was inevitable as we get closer and closer to the maximum capable out of these set of regulations. The McLaren pretty much seem to be there right now. Red Bull are struggling to make that work. And the wind tunnel says one thing, they do the other thing on the track, and, well, one thing works, one thing doesn't. I mean, in Suzuka, they literally said they changed everything on their car on the Friday night to try and make it work on Saturday, but their simulations and their data told them they should do X. It was horrific. Overnight, they did lots of work based on what they'd seen on the track. They came up with a solution that they turned up to Saturday with, and it was good enough for Max to get it on pole and then win the Grand Prix. But that's not a sustainable strategy. It's like Brighton hooking every approach shot and relying on a short game. Eventually, you're going to double bogey, and that's what's happened this weekend with Red Bull, right? So it's a big issue. What does Max think about it? That's the next step, because Max, he got a race win. Congratulations, right? But obviously Max wants far more than that, and it's the first time, I think, that he's been outside of the top 2 in the drivers' standings for nigh on 3 years. And it's kind of crazy, but it makes sense, and that's where we are today, and he says that everything went wrong. The key thing that they'll be looking for is Imola. They have an upgrade to bring. They think, well, they hope anyway, I don't even know if they think at this point, they certainly hope that's going to turn things around. And then Spain is the flexi wing changes, which they believe, or at least they hope again, will peg McLaren back. So it's a long season, and it's not like Max is way out of the fight. But if it stays like this, then he most certainly will be, and if he falls out of 3rd in the Drivers' Championship, then we have some serious questions on our hands, because Marco was interviewed by Sky Germany last night and was asked the question, is Max going to leave, or is that a risk? Is that a fear as it stands? And he said, it's a huge risk, it's a huge concern. And there was a BBC article on it today as well from Marco's comments here that the concern is great that Verstappen will simply look to leave the team. Right now, Newey has departed. They don't seem to be able to properly get this back on track. They're suffering again with issues in the balance and the performance of the car and entry oversteer that they've suffered with last year. The car still isn't good over the curbs. You know, loads of problems that they tried to resolve, and they resolved some, but not enough, frankly, for the front end of the championship. In addition to the rumours that the Red Bull powertrain's power unit is not going to be very good for next year. Does Max really want to stay, especially if he goes back to being number 33 next year, because he doesn't win this year's World Championship? So this was a rumour a while ago, but I wanted to get back to it again, because the big rumour was, like, this is October last year, but of course it's come back up again today, that if Max Verstappen ends the first half of the season, to the summer break basically, outside of 3rd in the championship, then, well, we think it's after a significant part. That was the rumour anyway, that I think it was from the Times, and they said that Verstappen has the power to walk away from Red Bull if he is outside of the top 3 in the championship after a significant part of the season. I'm guessing that's summer break, I'd imagine anyway, but that's the rumour, because Max and Red Bull, I imagine when they wrote the contract, recognised, okay, Max is going to maximise the car, so we'll put in a clause that if he's not top 3 in the championship, that probably means that he doesn't have the car, and therefore he would be welcome to walk away. That is the rumour as it stands today, that if we, it's obviously several rounds away, but if Max is not top 3, he may simply be able to leave the contract and walk to another team. And where might that potentially be? So, this is the current championship standings. Lando Norris is still leading, as he says. I'm pretty surprised that I even am right now, and I still think we have a long title fight ahead. I don't think that Lando's just gonna, mentally, well, I at least hope that Lando isn't gonna mentally collapse and Piastri is gonna walk all over him for the rest of the year. I think we are gonna have a competitive championship. I guess time will tell. Norris has 77 points. Piastri has 74 points. Verstappen has 69 points. Russell on 63. So realistically speaking, it's a four-way title fight right now for this year's World Championship. And Russell's done incredibly well to be within 14 points of Lando. Maybe not driver of the season, but certainly right up there, George Russell. Maybe he is driver of the season so far, George Russell. I think you could very much argue that. And as a result of that, there were rumours emerging today that Toto Wolff is very keen to put pen to paper and lock down Russell as the long-term piece of his driver lineup. Russell is out of contract for next year. His contract runs until the end of this season, and then it's done. Russell and Toto have kind of said, we'll get it sorted at some point. Russell's been spotted speaking with Briatore and some other teams just to say, all right, what would you pay me? What would you pay me? And then go to Toto and say, all right, I need to get paid this much. That's how it's going to be. So apparently Toto is now happy to do this. And this is the big rumour that is changing the minds of some people, right? Because Toto did a lot of courting of Max Verstappen last year when this seemed to be a possibility. It is now more likely than ever that Max leaving Red Bull is going to happen at some point, and potentially some point very soon indeed. Rumour has it, Toto, with Antonelli's, frankly, masterclass level performances over the first few rounds, he hasn't scored as many points as probably Antonelli deserved, but there is no way in hell that they're ever getting rid of Antonelli from that team. Like, he is the star of the future. That's the way that Mercedes see it. Antonelli ain't going anywhere. The only risk would be that if Max is available, do you get rid of George? Because as good as George years, and as good as he has even been so far this season, you know, he's not necessarily winning Grand Prix. I mean, like, he's not had opportunities to do so, but maybe you could argue that Max would be able to capitalise in a way that George doesn't. Look, if I had to choose, am I having Max or George? You know, I'm taking Max. I feel like pretty much everyone is taking Max. I do think George, you know, I've said this multiple times on the channel, is underrated by many fans, just because he's maybe not especially well liked. But he's not quite Max Verstappen, right? I think that is the point. Now, Toto may feel like the internal environment right now at Mercedes is really good. He may feel his drivers, if the car was a bit better, are definitely good enough to challenge at the top. And maybe you bring in Max, you create a couple of complications, right? With Antonelli coming through, you bring in Max's entourage, and, you know, politically it could get a little bit awkward. So there's a feeling from Toto possibly that, look, if George is performing this well, we actually don't need Max. But where does that leave Max? That's the big question then, because who are the other candidates? Aston Martin are the big one on paper. And look, let's be honest, if Max says, I mean, it's the summer break now where this would be a possibility, but if Max were to say, look, Toto, I'm going to join, would he say no? Dunno. Aston Martin would definitely not say no. Difficulty would be, I guess, for Alonso, because Alonso might end up finding himself out of the team at that point, right? Because I don't really think that Lance Stroll is going anywhere, but you guys may disagree. And they've been on a massive slide. It's difficult, I'm sure, for Lawrence Stroll to justify to Max that they're the place to go. Yeah, they've got Newey now, sure. Yeah, they've got the big factory and the facilities and the wind tunnel, but, you know, some of their technical team is still the same technical team, apart from the Newey angle, that's there now going into 26 as they've had for the last few years. So is Max going to have massive confidence? Yeah, they've got Newey, yeah, they've got the Honda engines, but is that particularly likely? I mean, sure, it's possible, and if Lawrence Stroll drops $1 billion in a massive contract, then sure, you can't rule it out. I think it's fascinating for George, though, right? Because as it stands, this contract clause is not able to be activated. Russell is, well, at least as far as we understand, Verstappen is currently third, and if he stays third, then likely nothing will change. But if Russell overtakes Max, he may be signing his own death warrant, in the sense that, you know, if Russell delivers great performances, which it's not like he's deliberately not going to do, but my point is that the better that Russell does with respect to Verstappen, the more he increases the chances that Verstappen takes his seat, depending on the way that Toto Wolff sees it. But I don't think Russell's going to do anything differently, and he's been performing very, very well so far this season. The question is, if Max is on the market, is there any seats that are realistically safe? I think it's a genuine question that might be worth throwing out there, right? Because you can say, oh, well, this driver's under contract, this driver's under contract, you know, that's not going to change. But contracts can be ripped up and broken, especially if Max Verstappen is on the market. I mean, you know, where do we look in terms of who might go anywhere? I don't see Ferrari changing. I don't think that Leclerc or Hamilton would go. You know, look, you could argue, is Hamilton no longer at his best? His adaptation process is definitely taking some time. You could argue there for Ferrari, but I think that the commitment they've made for Hamilton, the intention they have to use Hamilton's experience over the next couple of years to help them really develop into being a championship contender again, and also the money they've paid him and the brand value and everything, I don't think Ferrari are going to do anything. But I genuinely think every other team, it's not an impossibility, isn't it? I mean, for all the talk that Zak Brown has had about his own driver lineup, I mean, I'm just putting it out there. Like, if Max is available and McLaren won the title, is Zak Brown saying, Max, you know, no, we're keeping Lando, or we're keeping Oscar, or whatever, right? I don't think Oscar's, on this evidence, Oscar isn't going anywhere. But, I mean, arguably, whoever is McLaren's #1 driver at the end of the year, the #2 driver could get kicked for Max. I wouldn't say that's impossible. I think it's unlikely, but it's not impossible, is it? Let's be honest. And then you've got Aston Martin. I would never really rule out the Mercedes thing. I don't know. I mean, Max Verstappen is Max Verstappen, right? Like, if he's on the market and he's trying to leave Red Bull, you might regret passing up the opportunity. But as I say, there is some level of baggage that comes attached with that. Certainly, if you are McLaren, if you're Oscar Piastri, if you're Mark Webber, Piastri's manager, and all of a sudden conversations are being had as to, oh, well, Lando hasn't been that good this year. Could we get Max instead and send Lando to Red Bull, you know, do a swap? I think that's probably what would happen in this scenario. I mean, would Webber, not like Webber makes the calls, but I think there's obviously a kind of number one, number two dynamic, which Max Verstappen probably expects that he's not necessarily going to get at a couple of these teams. It's a super interesting story. I mean, we've been talking about Max leaving Red Bull for a long time now, but there has been no weekends in the last 12 months that it has felt more likely to occur relatively soon than we are feeling right now. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.